Welcome to the latest edition of CRDA's Resources for Resiliency. Our friend Sean Bennett joining us today.
Brent, thanks. Appreciate you having me today.
Okay, well, let's move to the topic that everyone's talking about right now, and that's everything stemming from what happened with George Floyd in Minnesota. That continues to reverberate through society. We've seen it here locally with the protests downtown and the conversations this week regarding building names and the statues and all of those kinds of things. In working in economic development, we've seen how the way a state could handle a social issue, use the example of HB2 in North Carolina, can have a negative impact on economic development. So I guess as you look at it through the lens of the legislature, what do you see, or how do you see the legislature responding? Because you have things that could potentially take a lot of time out of the legislature's already limited schedule. If the Heritage Act comes back into play, if you're talking about policing and equity, but there are conversations that also really need to happen. So how do you see that debate going forward?
What happened to George Floyd should have never happened. It should never happen to anybody. And what people are protesting about and concern of injustices across this country is real, and we have to face that. But what I don't want us to do is get caught up in just the emotional symbolism of it. So I'm much more focused on dealing with solutions to the problem. So what do we need to do as far as the direct response to the George Floyd incident is, we have to make sure that the public is confident in the police force. And how we do that is we help the police force eliminate the bad cops from their forces. And there is not a good cop out there that doesn't want to see that happen. I just met yesterday with leadership of our local police department here about things that we could do to help them. And they are as adamant about improving their profession as anybody is. So I hope that we will spend time and do that. Improve police training, improve how we train on de-escalation and use of force, require intervention of police officers that see bad actors out there, independent reviews of police shootings. All those different things absolutely need to happen. And I think you will see some suggestions put out that we need to start working on, really covering a lot of what I just described and even more, and focus on those. It's also important that we communicate with the public. One of the things that I've learned in talking with law enforcement and folks that connect with law enforcement on a regular basis since the George Floyd instance is a lot of the things that the Minneapolis police did, for instance, the chokeholds and the way that they responded, those aren't done here. They're not in policy here. They're not taught here in our training facilities. So we don't do those. Now, can I say that every police officer in South Carolina in every department does things right? No. But I can tell you that those sorts of things aren't taught and trained here. And we need to get that word out. We need to tell people what we're already doing right. South Carolina was a leader in body cameras, for instance. Do we need to do more? Do we need to create more funding to further implement? Absolutely. But we have required that, rolled that out, partly in response to the Walter Scott incident a number of years ago. So we are doing things and we are progressing in things. So I'm more interested, don't want to shut down the discussion, don't want to dismiss the frustration and the emotions that come out in those conversations, but I really want us to be able to focus on the solutions to actually move the needle and improve equality and justice for all of our citizens. I think that's critically important.
I think Congressman Clyburn called it sloganeering and versus statesmanship, and I think there's an element of that in the answer I just heard you give, and look forward to kind of hearing how things go forward. Shifting gears again, we work very closely with the Department of Commerce. We've seen firsthand the tremendous success that the agency's had under Secretary Hitt, and I'm just very interested, having, as I said, seen the success and seen the numbers. Just very interested in hearing your perspective on the audit and the performance of the department.
I think the biggest challenge that the Department of Commerce has is just in its mission, right? So better than anyone else, anybody that's involved in economic development recognizes there is a great deal of confidentiality that goes into working a project, expanding projects, competing for different projects that ultimately provide opportunities for our own citizens through job creation, tax revenue, and all those different things. That mission in and of itself flies in the face of what we expect from government, right? Which is transparency and openness and communication and those sorts of things. So there will always be that conflict with a Department of Commerce as long as we are actively engaged in recruiting and attracting more business and industry to our state. The solution to that, as is the solution for probably 99% of the things in the world, is communication and trust. And it's incumbent upon the leadership of the department to create that trust and communication with the members of the General Assembly. And that's probably the biggest thing that can happen is to have leadership that goes above and beyond to the extent that they can, to the extent that they can disclose proprietary information and those sorts of things, and not violate those covenants that we do as we're recruiting these industries, is to have a better relationship with the members of the General Assembly, particularly the members of the General Assembly who are skeptical of the actions.
Thanks for the candor there. I really appreciate it. I guess last question, you've been super generous with your time. Take us through, I guess, the next several months as we wind down this strange session. What are the highlights to look for? What are the key things we should be watching for as we kind of wind out toward that September-October budget timeline that you were talking about earlier?
I think the first target point is next week. Again, we'll get in there to pass the COVID budget. I call it the COVID budget, but it's the appropriation. It's really not even an appropriation. It's the providing authorization for these different agencies to spend the federal CARES Act money that has come down. Hopefully maybe even by Tuesday, hopefully at least by Wednesday, we'll get that passed. I think you will also see in the meantime, once we finish with session next week, and the farthest that we can go is Thursday, and then we are done until we're called back in that September, October. But once we get done with that session, I think some of the other points are you will see legislation introduced next week to deal with some of these policing issues and the challenges, and from what we've heard of, the frustrations from the public on dealing with that. You'll see that legislation introduced, and then it's my hope that we don't rush that. I mean, we want to get it done as quickly as possible, but it's my hope we just don't introduce something and within a couple of days pass something knee-jerk. Needs to go through the subcommittee process, needs to go through the committee process, get completely vetted, get full input from the public, law enforcement, all the constituencies involved, and hopefully when we come back September, early October, not only can we finish our budget and get good numbers, good revenue projections to do the budget work, but also have something teed up on the justice side to ensure that we're making the necessary changes that the public demands that actually move the needle. And it's probably not going to be, the catch-all, end-all. Once we pass that, all of our problems are over. But it's going to certainly address the policing problem, and then start to work on the other issues that we require. Those are kind of the bogey points that I would say are important to pay attention to going forward.
I had a mentor tell me one time that the difference between a politician and a statesman, politician is worried about the next election and the statesman's worried about the next generation. I definitely put you in that latter category. So I appreciate you taking some time and answering the questions today. And that will wrap us up with this edition of our Resources for Resiliency. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much.